and welcome to my presentation on the automation problem in work. It is a problem that is widespread across our community and something that I feel needs to be addressed. Let's get into the topic itself. Now, this is a problem that's been happening ever since the invention of computers, and honestly since the beginning of industrialization as a whole. But it's really been exacerbated. Anyway, it's been increased by the COVID-19 pandemic because it allowed a lot of the roadblocks that we were facing to the advancement of technology to be lifted, so that it could be increased to its natural levels, and it increased the opportunity for technological advancement by several issues that we will address later in the presentation. And one of the biggest issues that we'll discuss later is the displacement of low-wage workers, kind of that replacement kind of dichotomy that they get into later on. And as I said earlier, automation has been lacking for several different reasons. One of the biggest ones is cost-size relationship. A lot of the businesses that are able to purchase the equipment that gives them the top-notch edge are multinational corporations. And the problem with them buying newer equipment is that their businesses are quite large, so they need a lot of it to fully implement it with throughout their corporation. So the cost to put those into effect is significantly larger than many other options they have available, so quite often they don't choose it. And the second point is a continuation of that. Globalization. This goes into the issue of wages and stuff like that. A lot of the corporations that you see in the U.S. and Europe and the Western world, pretty much, export their services overseas to areas where people are willing to work for less, which sometimes can be cheaper for them overall than buying all those machines and implementing them on all of their grounds, which is a path that they often take. And then on the opposite side of things, we have cultural and political shifts. That side of business where people are starting to listen to people in the Western world, and they're offering higher wages to their employees, and they're giving them better benefits and such, which has kind of delayed the implementation of machines, because obviously the people who are doing that are focusing more on their actual employees than the capital that they use to produce wealth. And here we have the impact with low-wage workers. Obviously, you have greater demand because there's more people entering the job market as the population expands. But the automation is lowering the amount of jobs that are available at the same time, because jobs that we would traditionally have in the post-industrial world are being replaced by AI that can do those jobs for us. So there's a lot of demand, but there's no supply. So that kind of goes into increased requirements, which means the jobs that are available require more out of an individual person because there's more demand and there's less supply, which means that those jobs that are filled are going to be required to be more skilled. And those who can't meet those quotas are going to be unemployed, obviously, which means generally there's going to be a higher unemployment for people. And that kind of is spread primarily across unskilled jobs, where a lot of the work is just repetitive work, stuff that you can do over and over for hours, which means that those are getting replaced by machines, which is because that's primarily what machines can do. And this is having a lot of psychological problems on low-wage people, the lower class, and we'll get into that later. Another area that we need to touch on is small businesses, kind of primarily the clash between small businesses and corporations. they aren't really able to keep up with corporations right now because they can't afford the technology that is like allows them to generate all that revenue, which means that they have to pay more. They have to pay more wages to their workers to compensate for this during these difficult times, obviously in COVID, to keep them there and keep their business operating and running. Which means they have high expenses and their profit is less because not only do they have to pay their workers more, but they're also earning less revenues because there's less people that want to go out and buy things during a pandemic. And because they can't offer as many benefits, even if they mean well, they can't offer as many benefits to corporations right now, just because of the sheer difference in earnings. Which means that the workers that work there are going to be disgruntled, and that's something else they have to deal with. And to compensate for all this, they have to raise their prices, and obviously that's going to upset the customers as well. How corporations are going to benefit from this? They're really the only people that are going to come up on top if this continues. Obviously, if we're in a pandemic, there isn't going to be a lot of businesses trying to go out and make gigantic purchases to like overhaul their company, except for the corporations that can afford it, right? And the low demand for it actually makes it significantly cheaper because there's less people wanting those technologies right now. And obviously, when they implement those technologies, it cuts the costs that they operate with, which means that they can operate at a higher profit margin, which increases productivity. And on a side note, usually during turbulent times, a lot of people like to invest, which means that the investments into the company are going to be higher, which means they'll have even more capital to reinvest, and it's just like an endless cycle that continues. Kind of a tangent here, but it's a good comparison, and it's through the lens of like a historian for social science. There's a lot of parallels in the information revolution to the industrial revolution that I feel like should be compared because it helps to let us know what we should do for the future based on what we did in the past, which is why I think it's an important way to view this problem through. Like in the past, you had major companies gaining advantage because there wasn't really laws implemented to kind of curb them. So they were financially well off because of that. You have a few examples there on the presentation. Standard Oil, J.D. Rockefeller, he had a gigantic monopoly over that in the U.S. and pretty much no one could touch him. Carnegie Steel, he wasn't as much of a monopolistic person, but he was definitely the biggest in that area for sure. And just like now, in the past, small businesses couldn't really keep up, and they either had to merge or shut down. And blue-collar workers, the low-wage workers, as we call them now, were ignored, and their rights were kind of ignored. So honestly, it's something that we're going to need to address again, just in a different way. Instead of physical work now, it's logistical work. And another kind of tangent that I want to go on that's also important is like the different kind of like subjugated groups that need to be addressed. Specifically race, class, and age. These are kind of the groups that are most at risk for this kind of thing. Obviously, we kind of talked about class a little bit, with like the lower class being at risk because a lot of the blue-collar jobs are repetitive work. But also like race, like people of color, are going to be at risk because they are already at risk before this started happening, just because of their places in society and their vulnerability and not really having enough social support to be on equal levels with the dominant groups. And then age groups are also going to be at risk because they have problems with experience. If they get fired from a job that they have a lot of experience in, and they try to find a job again, they may have difficulty because they only have experience in that one specialization, and if they can't find experience in that specialization, then they're going to be out of work, which makes it difficult to move up vertically, as with people of color and other groups like that. So overall, we viewed it through the lens of economics, history, and psychology. These are the main three ways that this problem should be viewed through, because they have the greatest effects on society through those lenses. And it's definitely a problem that we need to solve in the future. Otherwise, there will be severe consequences. So, thank you for listening, and see ya.